just one day after Vietnam held a parade to celebrate the 85th National Day, China also organized a similar event, but on a much larger scale. If we only compare the numbers, Vietnam could hardly compete. However, there is a truth that the Chinese people, especially the ruling class and intellectuals of the billion-people nation, deliberately choose to ignore. That is the legitimacy of the victory parade against the Japanese army in World War II. In fact, these parades celebrating victory in World War II by the Chinese look more like a gesture aimed at Japan rather than truly bringing national pride. So what is the real story behind this? Let's join KyHuynh Insights to start today's story. On September 3, 2025, the whole world was amazed by China's parade with more than 12,000 soldiers and hundreds of domestically produced military equipment. It can be said that China was very successful in sending a message that its military power is now among the top 3 globally. However, if you pay attention, you will notice that this parade only took place in front of Tiananmen Square and along Chang'an Avenue, without going into other streets of Beijing. If in Vietnam's parade, people witnessed the army marching within the loving embrace of the citizens, in China, the atmosphere was completely different. Indeed, Chinese citizens had only 2 options if they wanted to watch the event. The first was to watch it live on TV or via live stream. The second was to apply for approval from the local authorities to watch it in person. The process was not only difficult but also time-consuming, which made the atmosphere of the people at the parade completely lack genuine joy and warmth. Instead, the parade was dominated by the heaviness of military formations and cold machinery. In fact, for those who truly love and study history, many questions arise about the legitimacy of this event in both times it was held, in 2015 and 2025. Instead, many scholars have argued that this is essentially an act by Zhang Nanhai directly aimed at Tokyo. It is like a declaration that China's status has changed. It is now stronger and has returned to being the big brother over Japan. Put more bluntly, Beijing is willing to spend a mountain of money just to intimidate the Japanese out of resentment for the island nation's past actions. This is something the Chinese excel at. They have enough economic power to buy everything, from buying positions and titles recorded in the laws of feudal times, to now buying a victory that is more for show than a genuine triumph. Because in essence, while the Chinese did indeed drive the Japanese out of their territory, they were not truly the ones who made the decisive contribution. The reality is that it was the Soviet Union and the United States who played the biggest roles in bringing about this victory. In fact, even nominally, it was the Republic of China under the Kuomintang that was officially recognized as leading the fight at the time Japan was expelled, not the Chinese Communist Party. Throughout the anti-Japanese war, while the Kuomintang engaged in fierce battles, such as those at the Great Wall, Shanghai, and Changde, they were the ones who suffered catastrophic casualties, becoming so exhausted that they were eventually defeated and forced to flee to Taiwan in 1949. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party contributed very little beyond small-scale guerrilla attacks. The greatest credit must go to the Americans and the Soviets. Starting from 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States went into a rage and mobilized its massive industrial capacity to serve the war effort. From then on, island by island across the Pacific, the United States crushed the Japanese military, leaving the island nation without a chance to fight back. The 2 atomic bombs dropped on Japan's territory were the brutal exclamation points for this nation's defeat. At the same time, despite being stretched thin fighting the most elite German army in the world, the Soviet Red Army quickly opened the Eastern Front right after the liberation of Berlin. In just a few weeks of August 1945, the Soviet Union crushed the nearly 1 million-strong Kuomintang army in Manchukuo to liberate China. From this, we can see why the legitimacy of China's claim of victory over Japan has always been questioned, and rightfully so. It is no coincidence that when Vietnam celebrates its independence, it always uses the phrase "successful August Revolution" rather than proclaiming victory over the Japanese Empire. Vietnam understands both itself and its opponent, while Beijing's arrogance does not allow for such humility, especially when it comes to Japan. But let's just assume for a moment that China truly did defeat Japan. Then why does it harbor such deep resentment toward Japan that it must hold a massive military parade like this? The answer lies in a sense of humiliation deeply ingrained in the Chinese people, not just among Beijing's ruling elite. It is no coincidence that two peoples separated by only a narrow strait harbor a hostility, suspicion, and rivalry so persistent that it has become almost part of their national identity. If China is merely irritated by the stubbornness of its little brother Vietnam, its feelings toward Japan are more like seething anger mixed with helplessness. In ancient times, these two nations clashed only once indirectly, when Japan sent troops to the Korean peninsula to vie for influence, resulting in the Battle of Beijing in 663. However, the Japanese were defeated by the Silla-Tang allied forces. I'll temporarily count that as a Chinese victory, even though in essence it was only an indirect success. You may ask me why. Because after that, China would never again have the opportunity to celebrate a victory over that tiny island nation. For thousands of years as neighbors, the Chinese have always looked down on Japan. In the eyes of the mainland, across the East China Sea lay a barren island with no resources and plagued by natural disasters. Its people were seen as uncultured and heavily influenced by the Heavenly Kingdom. In general, Japan was not worth paying attention to. This mindset persisted all the way into the 19th century, when the Qing dynasty still ruled Beijing. Even though the Qing were already in decline, they still held on to the ideology of the Heavenly Kingdom. They continued to view Japan as a small, barbaric island nation, mere students borrowing bits of Chinese culture. But in reality, everything had reversed completely. The Japanese had surged ahead through industrialization and westernization, while China remained complacent, still clinging to the belief that its position was naturally superior. By the end of the 19th century, an event would awaken China from this delusion and force it to face a bitter reality. That event later became known as the War of National Humiliation. In just 8 months of fighting, over 500,000 troops of the so-called Heavenly Kingdom were utterly defeated by a Japanese force of fewer than 250,000 soldiers. Beijing's loss was so humiliating that reformist thinker KyHuynh bitterly exclaimed that Japan had merely spent 20 years learning from the West, yet was able to crush a China with 4,000 years of civilization. Similarly, reformist Liang Qichao lamented in anguish that the Heavenly Kingdom, which had prospered for 10,000 years, had burst like a fragile bubble. And that was only the beginning of the nightmare that Japan was about to unleash upon the mainland. If the War of National Humiliation was a punch that jolted China awake, then the massive invasion launched by the Japanese Empire in 1937 to establish the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere was a knockout blow that completely humiliated China. For the third time in its history, after the Song and Ming dynasties, China once again lost its capital to a foreign invader. But this time, they did not fall to neighboring land powers. Instead, they were defeated by the military of an island nation that Chinese history had scorned for thousands of years. In that dark period, they lost the vast region of Manchuria, all of historic northern China, and even the prosperous Jiangnan region, including Shanghai, to Japan. The bitterness of these defeats fueled deep hatred, as the Chinese watched helplessly while the Japanese army committed horrific atrocities across their land. Women were turned into playthings, while men were used as living shields. The same atrocities happened to children and the elderly. However, from this point, a paradox emerged. Japan was defeated in World War II and became a peaceful nation, while China, though nominally victorious, harbored deep resentment. The root cause lies in the fact that China's victory was not achieved through its own military strength, but was largely due to the U.S. dropping atomic bombs and the Soviet Union crushing the Kuomintang army. China was liberated rather than liberating itself. This mixture of humiliation and helplessness ensured that China would never forget and never stop resenting Japan. What's noteworthy is that this resentment is not only a historical memory, but has also deeply penetrated into present-day comparisons. After the war, Japan rose miraculously to become the world's second-largest economic power in the latter half of the 20th century. Meanwhile, Under Mao Zedong, China was impoverished and isolated, trapped in catastrophic mistakes like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. The image of a modern, wealthy Japan with international influence, despite being a former war criminal, was a bitter pill for China to swallow. They could not accept that a nation once considered a small, insignificant country had managed to surpass them by such a wide margin. This deep-seated inferiority complex gradually turned into a long-lasting grudge. Japan, which had once humiliated China and forced it to bow down, was now metaphorically sitting on top of China again, this time through economic dominance. By the 1980s and 1990s, when China began its reforms and opening up, this resentment evolved into direct competition. China was determined to surpass Japan in every field. Whenever Chinese media reported on GDP growth, they would immediately compare it to Japan's numbers. And by 2010, when China officially overtook Japan to become the world's second-largest economy, Beijing's state media hailed it as a historic victory. Yet, this resentment did not disappear. Even though China's GDP had surpassed Japan's technological quality, standard of living, and international prestige remained things that China envied. The Chinese were bitter that despite their vast population, enormous territory, and growing power, the world still viewed Japan as a civilized and trustworthy nation. Meanwhile, China is often viewed with suspicion. This resentment is also evident in popular culture. In China, films about the war against Japan continue to be mass-produced, even if they are filled with absurd, exaggerated, and completely unrealistic scenes. If you've ever watched them, you probably couldn't help but laugh at countless ridiculous moments, like Chinese communist soldiers tearing Japanese soldiers in half with their bare hands, or firing a single shot that wipes out an entire squad. Yet these films continue to thrive because they tap into the deep-seated resentment of the Chinese people. Japan is the enemy. Japan once humiliated a powerful China, and now it is the duty of later generations to vilify Japan as a way of compensating for past helplessness. In textbooks and on television, the Chinese are never allowed to forget Japan, but not for the sake of reconciliation. Instead, it's to keep this hatred alive as part of their national identity. Another paradox is that while China remains endlessly bitter toward Japan, the Japanese tend to look toward the future. After the war, Japan focused on its economy, maintained its pacifist constitution, and rarely spoke of the past in ways that fueled hatred. This deeply frustrates China. They want Japan to always bow its head in apology, to bear eternal responsibility. But Japan only offers formal apologies and then continues moving forward. As a result, China always feels that the historical debt has not been repaid. This bitterness has become an endless obsession. However, this resentment not only harms China's international image, but also traps the country in the past. Instead of seeing Japan as a potential partner for cooperation in technology, culture, and education, China views it with suspicion. They waste energy maintaining hatred instead of focusing on improving themselves. The result is a society caught in a double-edged mindset, desperately wanting to surpass Japan while constantly fearing being looked down on by them. This resentment ultimately becomes a vicious cycle, imprisoning China within itself. The saying, "China will resent Japan for life," is not merely a sarcastic remark, it is a historical truth. From the humiliating defeat at the hands of a small island nation in the late 19th century to the horrifying memories of devastation during World War II, from envy of Japan's economic miracle to anxiety over Tokyo's close ties with Washington, Beijing has continuously nurtured and exploited this mentality as a political tool. As a result, this bitterness is no longer just an emotion, but has become an integral part of the power play within WWII. However, resentment can never replace the truth. Japan does not need hatred to advance. All it needs is hard work, creativity, and the building of a stable society. Meanwhile, if China continues to cling to this deep-seated resentment, no matter how powerful it becomes, at its core, it will remain like an old man filled with rage over the humiliation inflicted long ago by what was once a much smaller adversary, forever unable to escape the shadow of the past. Resentment may serve as fuel for a short while, but it cannot be the foundation for building a sustainable future. Perhaps this lingering resentment toward Japan reflects China's deepest insecurity. that of a superpower that never feels truly confident in itself.